That you took to share with us your unique take on the mobile world. Next up, we have a great panel discussion harnessing the enormous potential of 5G technology. We have a wonderful panel of experts. We're very pleased to have Shaitan Sharma here to lead the discussion. Chetan is one of the true leading strategists in the mobile industry, and the wireless executives from around the world seek out his insights and industry predictions. And as they reset the stage here, we'd like to get you ready for the next panel, and I'll welcome Shaitan Sharma to the panel. I'll let him introduce the panel as we're going. Shaitan. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Steve.
you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Hey, Paul. Thank you. Good to see you. Craig, thank you. Thank you for joining. Hey, good to see you. Thank you. Hi,
so our panel focuses on 5G and
Mr. Union. Yeah. Have a seat.
what it means to the ecosystem, the broader ecosystem, and how operators should think about it. So before we kind of get into the more tactical issues, I wanted to step back and give you a sense of why 5G is important and how did we arrive at this moment in time. So as Steve mentioned, I've been doing wireless stuff since 1G days. Have been through every cycle, have been working with a number of players across the ecosystem and throughout the world. And wireless industry never seems to amaze me. Every few years, there's a new set of technologies that completely disrupt the industry, but also starts to disrupt other aspects of the ecosystem. I've written a number of books and papers about the topic, and more pertinent to what we are discussing today, a number of papers on 5G. So before we kind of get into the strategic question, I wanted to get into what it means for wireless to be at this moment in time. And so I don't know how many of you have been to an island called Tokelau, but it's one of the most remote places on the planet. There are no airports to get to. It takes 36 hours just by boat to get there, which runs twice a week. And it's one of the smallest economy. But they have 4G LTE, and they skipped all the previous generations, went straight to 4G LTE, all VoIP. And their stated goal for 2020 is 20 megabits per second. And this is my friend Teolofi Inosa, who is the CEO of the operator, the lone operator, obviously. But he's also the chairman of the regulatory body, which I'm sure a lot of my operator friends will appreciate. So why I'm talking about Tokelau is wireless represents human activity. And if you look at the NASA images from the sky above, you will see that the light indicates the human activity that's taking place on Earth. And it's a good measure to look at what's happening in the ecosystem. And so if you dial back a few hundred years back and measure human activity, you will see that a lot of stuff happening in India, which for 1,500 years had the highest GDP, some stuff happening in Europe. Fast forward to 1800, you see that Europe starts to pop up, China starts to come online. By that time, late 1800s, China GDP is overtaken by the US. And then 1900s, Europe is really going strong, US starts to pop up. And then you look at the map today, about 2017, the trade map in terms of trade activity, you see that US, China, and Europe are the main centers. And so as you go forward, look at 30, 40 years, the question becomes, what will be the centers of excellence and centers of human activity going forward? And that's what really this is about, the technology evolution. And to address that, I've been thinking about something I call connected intelligence to help answer the question of where do we go from here? Every 30, 40 years, there's a big technology cycle that comes in and disrupts the global economy. It has been happening for the past 200 years, and this time is no different. And so I believe that close to $1,000 trillion will be generated in the next 10 years. And connected intelligence, which is essentially sensors and software, will play a significant role in that journey. And so if you look at the stack, you have the thinking objects or the sensors, you have connectivity, which is 5G in our context, you have intelligence, trust, and number of industries. And that makes up whatever $75 trillion economy worldwide. And what typically happens in these journeys is you have tools, you have the business models, and you apply them to an industry to disrupt it, transportation, healthcare, and so on and so forth. And that's likely to happen in the next 10 years. And to illustrate that, let's kind of look at the last 2 cycles. And so if you look at number of companies who were generating $1 billion or more in each of these cycles and add them up, you will get a good measure of what the cycle has done to the global economy. And so if you look at the internet cycle, you see a nice ramp up. A number of new players like Google, Yahoos of the world gave birth in that era. Then you look at the mobile era, which really started from LTE broadband, cloud, and smartphones. And that disrupted and overtook the internet era. And my belief is that the connected intelligence era will surpass the mobile era in no time because of the number of elements that are coming into the ecosystem. The way it works is you have one input of internet, it disrupts and creates new companies, and the number of companies generating $1 billion or more, you can see in the chart, US leading with China and others following. The next cycle, mobile, cloud, and software were the inputs, and you see, again, kind of the growth in the US market followed by China and the rest. But if you kind of compare the two, you see that the number of companies generated in the mobile era was significantly higher than what happened in the internet era. And so what happens is internet comes in, disrupts the industries, and you get 9 or 10 companies generating $1 billion or more. You have 3 inputs, smartphones and cloud and LTE broadband, and that disrupts, and that creates close to 120 companies who are generating $1 billion or more. And so if you kind of play it out, in 2010, there were about 4 companies in the mobile era generating $1 billion or more, and watch how it progresses. So 4 in 2010, 35 in 2014, 16, 95, and in last year, close to 120, with US leading with 60 and roughly divided between China, Europe, and rest of the world. And so what happens in the connected intelligence era is the number of inputs are increasing by an order of magnitude. It's not only 5G, it's AI, robotics, blockchain, business models, and so on and so forth. And my belief is that that's going to have a tremendous disruptive impact over the next 10 years, if not the next 20 or 30. So the number of laws which are based on empirical data, connected intelligence, but I wanted to just focus on one of them, which is growth. And so if you look at markets like in Finland, US, India, you see a tremendous growth in data consumption. And that again implies human activity. And so you are seeing 30, 40 gigabytes of consumption every month in these markets. And so if you see kind of the contrast with the US, T-Mobile, which is the highest generator of data per user per month, there's a 2-year lag. So you can look in the future and say, well, this is where T-Mobile is likely to be, or any other operator you benchmark against. And so one of the principles or the laws of connected intelligence is what might seem extraordinary today, meaning less than 1% of people or subscribers doing on your network, will become mainstream in less than 5 years. In some markets, it's less than 3 years. And so that gives you a guiding principle of how you plan going forward. So how do we make sense of 5G? Well, if you just look at the data traffic, in 2008, 86 petabytes per year. 2018, in 19 hours, the same data traffic. And going forward 10 years in 15 minutes. And so what that has done to the revenue and CapEx equation globally and in the US, roughly 75% jump in the 2 decades of 4G and 2G plus 3G. And that led to about 71% jump in revenue. In the US, 53% CapEx increase led to 80 plus increase in revenue. We've also known that the cycles are getting faster. So 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, the time to reach 10 million subs is shortening. And if you look at 5G, if the forecasts come true, then it'll be 2 years ahead of what 4G was. And 4G was pretty fast compared to the rest. That has tremendous implications for not only the US, but the global ecosystem as to how money moves, how trade happens, how new industries and companies are created. We've also known that each generation creates a 3x impact on the industry. So 3x times the revenue is generated in each cycle. 4G probably will be close to 5x. And connected intelligence might be even higher than that. But there's a question. If you look at the chart, you see 2G was a big cycle that lasted a long time. And 3G was a minor blip in the overall evolution of the last 30, 40 years. And then 4G obviously dominated the cycle. So the question is, does 5G look like 4G, or does it look like 3G? And we don't know the answers to that yet. There are many use cases of 5G. We'll get into some of them. We don't have time to get into details. But I think the fundamental question in front of the industry is, does 5G change the trajectory of the industry revenues? I mean, typically, when you start going down, you have to fundamentally reinvent the industry. And in the US, net revenues have started to decline. And the question is, will 5G pull it up? Or we need a new operating model for the industry? We did some benchmarking across the top 18 global operators in terms of revenue. So the non-digital revenue for these 18 operators worldwide is largely flat. There's no growth. It's actually declining in aggregate. But the digital revenue for these same operators is growing by double digits. And so it clearly shows that there's a part of revenue to be had, but it might be in a different place. You might need a different strategy to get there. In terms of how you measure performance, I think has also evolved over time. We're getting more into more energy and cost-focused network dynamics. And my belief is that cost will be the most important factor for the 5G as to what does it cost to transmit one bit from one point to another. So the number of factors around 5G deployment, we'll get to some of them, but economics is clearly the big one. A few comments on 5G race, a lot of news about 5G and 5G race. And we took a much broader view of how should we measure 5G race around, how do you compare countries. And based on our assessment, because of the ecosystem strength of the US is slightly ahead of China, but China is going to come strong in 2020. So in closing, about 10 years ago, I wrote a piece for a book called The Next 10 Years, 15 Trends That Matter. And one of the last elements of that piece was that the next 10 years will be more disruptive than the last 100. And I'm pretty sure I can say that with confidence that the next 10 years will be more disruptive than the last 100. So with that, I'll end my comments, and I'll jump right into Q&A with my esteemed panelists. Thank you very much. Great. So maybe we can just do a brief intro about what you do, and a quick sentence on what 5G means to you.
Yeah, hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Challoner. I'm VP of Network Product Solutions for Ericsson, which means I look after the radio solutions for Ericsson in North America. And I think 5G is going to be the biggest transformation that we see in our lives. And so I look forward to coming back to that statement.
Thanks. My name is Bob Everson. I'm Global Director of Mobility and 5G at Cisco. So working across the end-to-end architecture, collaborating closely with customers, as well as engineering to develop the right solutions. From my standpoint, I think it's important, we look at 5G from really 3 different angles. So first, obviously, there's 5G New Radio, which is a critical part of delivering 5G services. But then, we go into the actual 5G services aspects, which I think Charlie touched on some great things, and I'm sure we'll get into here. Fantastic opportunities. Some of them require the 5G Airlink, and some of them don't. And then the third is this architectural transformation, which again, Charlie got into a little bit this morning. I was really happy to see, which is there's an opportunity as the transition to 5G, there's an architectural transition that operators can move towards to make their systems more agile, lower cost, and open the opportunity for more revenue.
Hello, I'm Brian Pickering with Nokia. I do 5G product sales for North America. From a 5G perspective, I think it's a total from an end-to-end type of solution that we have to be looking at. We talk about radio all the time, but I think that's the core piece of it that's going to be most important. And then also the backhaul. You got to take that into account too. So I think that all aspects of it are going to be very important for us looking forward.
Great.
Hi, Craig Sparks. I'm a Chief Innovation Officer at C-Spire, and I support the technology development and the product development teams as we're looking into 5G, both on the fixed wireless, on the home services side. We have a fiber to the home network we want to complement, in addition to the mobility side. And yeah, there are a number of things that Charlie was well prepped. Kudos for his team, whoever got him ready for this, because he really did touch on some of the core things that are germane to this audience today. That we are regional-based, facilities-based operators with networks, staring at this capital expenditure in front of us. And the key is 5G is technology, it's a platform, it's not a business model. And you've really got to understand some of the disruptive things about network slicing and sharing and networks to understand the landscape in front of us here and how we approach 5G. So I'm looking forward to getting into that with the panelists.
All right.
Good morning, Eric Woody. I run the operational and technical group at Union Wireless. To me, 5G just really appears to be the biggest hit on my checkbook. I know it's kind of good they segregated the operators from the vendors on this panel. You know, I really feel it's not just necessarily the 5G equipment itself, it's really the infrastructure to get the low latency, get the backhaul necessary in rural America. And that's my take.
So let's, you know, I want to get to by the end of the session around some of the technical issues that a lot of the operators in the room are grappling with. But let's start with Paul around, you know, what's different and exciting about 5G from a pure features and functionality perspective. You know, why the world is going gung-ho on 5G. You know, what are the features that are making it happen?
Well, I think the first thing to say is the sheer velocity of 5G introduction has been staggering to me. If we compare 5G introduction from first call to the field, 10 times faster than 4G. If you look at the standardization process, probably twice as fast as any other generation. And in fact, I think we probably went a little too fast because now we're correcting a few little issues in the standards process, and we're having to align the ecosystem and everyone to get the kind of up to the latest standards level. So that's exciting. So we've seen launches on the fixed wireless side and the mobility side. I mean, I think you're talking to a room full of RF engineers a few years back to say, hey, we've got this great plan, we're going to take millimeter wave, and we're going to create a mobility system with it. You'd have, you know, a lot of shaking heads. But I think, you know, what was interesting, I think it's gone a lot better than expected. And we've really have, I think, pulled it off as an industry in North America, leading the way in millimeter wave type capability and getting to that kind of gigabit capabilities and the low latencies. And then, as you know, I think that we've seen some of the antenna technologies. I think I've been kind of pleasantly surprised how well the MIMO technologies have worked. We kind of talked about massive MIMO for a long time. I mean, it really does do what it says on the tin. And you know, I think we've had really good field experience in getting the 2x, 3x gain of massive MIMO that we talked about, but we've really delivered it. And so then, if I look out ahead, I think, you know, we're really just starting in our journey for 5G. And so there's lots more features to come. We've kind of taken the first use cases of fixed wireless, then mobility, but really the next use case is more of the IoT capabilities. So if you look at ultra reliable, low latency connectivity, the very exciting feature still being defined, I think that really unleashes the power of IoT in 5G, so that's exciting.
So millimeter wave, network slicing, URLC, support for massive IoT deployments.
Yep.
Bob, what else? How does the core change in how operators view their network?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. 5G presents a lot of opportunities, but one of the things we have to realize, and I think you showed it in some of your charts, is this is the first generation where, you know, revenue and ARPU has not been increasing normally in a normal trend as we go. As you invest in 3G, there was more data revenues. We invest in 4G, there's more data revenue. And so what it's created is this impetus for finding new services. And it's also creating a platform for building out new services. And so, you know, some of the exciting opportunities that we see, you know, obviously the enterprise market, we've talked to enterprise customers and they've said we are willing to pay for some of these services, and they've given us some specific areas around, you know, extending their enterprise capabilities out into the mobile network more cleanly, security, things like that. You know, we've done some work, we did some innovation over in the UK on rural use cases, so we're doing a lot of exploration, and I think a lot of that kind of comes from the core of the network and that service delivery. And so one of the things that that's really essential here is this transition over to more of a software-defined network, which provides that agile platform. And I think as customers are investing in 5G technology or investing towards supporting 5G, even if they're not ready yet, you know, I think one of the key things is invest now for things that are going to get you to where you want to get in the future.
So Brian, your colleague yesterday talked about, you know, clearly there is a need to handle the day-to-day stuff on the network side, but the real revenue is on in the industries. Could you talk about how 5G is positioned to enable application services in industry that was not possible before?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the aspects of it is, I think Charlie mentioned earlier, was network slicing was an example of that. I think that's a technology here that will help enable everyone to take advantage of different types of use cases, set up service level agreements that they may want to drive specifically, help drive the capacity on the network and things like that. So I think those are excellent opportunities that can help drive from an industry perspective. And I think these other types of use cases we mentioned from an enterprise side of it, agriculture, things like that, you can all go after and drive for. So, and I think network slicing can help drive that piece.
So Craig, what's your response to the things that you have heard here on the panel, in general, what you know about 5G, and more specifically around your experience with some of the trials that you guys have been doing around, fixed, irrespective of what the underlying technology or frequency band might be?
Sure, and I'll touch on it. And actually, getting to the slicing part, when you understand the most disruptive thing for us in this industry and for us as carriers has always been the core architecture side of 5G. But it's always fun to talk about millimeter wave. It's up front in everybody's windows today. But the things that it enables are actually pretty profound. They really do. Your point, 10 years from now, it's a different world altogether in terms of the automation and the tools around discovery. Yesteryear, this group, we exist off a model of roaming revenues and in-collect and out-collect, and if someone wants to roam into us, they pick up the phone, they call us, it's a we understand that. That yesteryear of 10 years, 10 years from now, it's highly automated, and in terms of me looking at the capital expenditures on a 5G build, if I've got to monetize those out of my mobility customers alone, I'm upside down. So I've actually got to look to a lot of the tools and companies that don't exist today. And actually Charlie's analogy around Airbnb is a really good one, because you need automated orchestration tools that help you do discovery and find networks of networks. And they're going to mix in everything from unlicensed spectrum and LTE, and unlicensed private LTE. And from a carrier's perspective, one of the reasons I can't, if I use yesteryear's engineers and models and business arrangements, I can't wrap my head around that because I don't have any guarantees. I want carrier grade. How do I know what it's like in this hotel, or my ulti call is going to drop from the elevators, and so you shy away from that. But you actually have these orchestration automation tools that actually collect all that information, give me actually SLAs against assurances, and I go to brokerages, Airbnbs of the future, us in the mobility industry, that help me find those kind of networks and get into them and use them. And to Charlie's point, he made a really good point, and you did too on one of your slides about spectral efficiency, bits per hertz per square kilometer. Actually, you need to go to cubic meter, because it's in massive MIMO in New York City, it's a three-dimensional problem now. If you actually, had Superman goggles and you could look at a heat map of the United States and see that, you'd see on an hour-by-hour basis and times in the morning, there's a lot of fallow spectrum that we are not filling all the car seats in. And so the only way that I think we really make the best out of our 5G investments, whether we're regional carriers or tier ones, is we need to look to all of the things that, it's under the umbrella of virtualization. That's just one of the technologies that enables it. But it's this orchestration and automation tools and super brokers of the future, and the way Google Fi should be working 10 years from now. All of that has to come together for us to see a path forward where we really monetize and make the best out of our 5G investments. If I stick with the yesteryear models, we look at it right now and we're like, nah, it's scary. No, thank you. But you can't think that way.
Sure. Yep. Eric, anything to add to what Craig said? And additionally, as you're thinking about writing that check, how far off you are from that journey? Is it a set of things need to happen before you get to that point? Or at what point do you start the planning cycle for 5G or thinking about 5G?
Well, as pointed out...
Let Eric respond.
Oh, sorry, standalone.
You can go ahead and answer.
Here, the key is the standalone and non-standalone 4G, and actually the core, the 3GPP core architectures are all still coming to fruition. All that needs to be put in place for the Airbnb brokers of the future to come in and help us provide value. But we're not there yet.
The engineer in me loves the functionality you get, the increases in spectral efficiencies. You get the lower latencies, you get the network slicing. Everybody's kind of mentioned all these key points. And I think it really helps us in our network. It doesn't help us in the entire network today, but it really does help us in those areas, especially for me, where I have very concentrated population centers and then miles and miles of nothing. It does help there. Now, how do I monetize it enough? And it's that slow integration. I don't see, you know, me, monkey flips a switch, we're 5G, yay, in the entire network. It's got to happen. And the industries in our regions really do have to find the use cases where it provides them value so I can provide them the network to make them more efficient. Yet it's still about how do I get the infrastructure out there and that can support this. And you know, everybody keeps talking about how wonderful and how fast everything is, and all I keep doing is looking at, oh my God, my cell radius just shrunk. Mm-hmm. It keeps getting smaller and smaller, yet my population density hasn't changed a bit. Yeah. So, more and more facilities and more miles of fiber.
So Bob, you know, how do operators think about, I mean, obviously, you know, before you actually launch 5G, you have to do a significant amount of planning. At what point, how are you guiding and counseling the operators in terms of, you know, when should we think about, what's the triggering mechanism for planning for 5G?
Yeah, so I think there have been a couple really good points made here. You know, Craig's point around automation is something that, you know, you can start to bring into the network now and start to build that out. And there's no way that they can really operate these networks going forward without automation. And so when we look at, you know, it's funny when you talk about triggering mechanisms. I love Charlie's switch. But for a lot of these guys, there's not just one switch that they flip and it's going to be sort of a binary shift over to 5G. And so right now, it's about, you know, as you have to invest in more backhaul, you know, and densify your network or whatever you're doing, making sure that they're investing in programmable transport technologies that are going to scale and allow them to support 5G down the road. You know, building in automation where they can. You know, building in more virtualization and getting their core and their operations systems more in the cloud. And we can do all these things as part of the natural growth of 4G. And so not requiring, you know, huge investments towards 5G and then allowing operators on their sort of their natural path to 5G. In tandem with that, we continue to work developing the new services. And helping with the business cases that are going to justify some of this build out for 5G. There are a lot of great use cases that require dedicated 5G that we're going to see in the future. I think, you know, you mentioned URLC. That's probably one of the toughest business cases to make because I think some of the while you can imagine services that could benefit from that. The cost of that infrastructure is really high, and so I think it's going to be a little while before we get to a really good, you know, let's say, you know, the high end of URLC. But there's a lot of really good business cases around, you know, slicing. Customers will pay for and build more robust services on top of as we figure out the rest of this.
Well, you know, obviously, Ericsson as a company is involved in a lot of trials and a lot of planning process around the world. Rural is not that unique to US. How are operators outside the US thinking about coverage, revenue, and 5G planning and rollout in other markets? Is it primarily to, you know, do more broadband? Is it more because it's driven by the government? Or what's the incentive for them to think about rural in their geographies?
I think we see around the world, you know, some similar problems, but I think, you know, there's a lot of work right now on 5G and IoT rural situations. So, for example, we've been working with Telstra in Australia for the rural agriculture case. So this is the automated irrigation systems, so that has, you know, wide area geographies around Melbourne, for example, providing coverage for IoT sensors that look at soil moisture levels and solar. You know, how long the sun shines every day, and then provides a closed loop feedback for that agriculture. And they're kind of proven points. But also we see, so for example, in China, working with China Mobile, where in a lot of rural areas, there is a high risk of mudslide, and we're working with the China Geological Society to figure out IoT cases where we can protect rural and residents against mudslides and earthquake protection. So there's lots of those IoT cases. And still, but clearly rural broadband is kind of still a major issue. And I think we have to, from a US perspective, make sure that we're looking after the rural agriculture, rural manufacturing, and all those different segments that are important.
Brian, maybe you could talk about some of the other use cases that doesn't require a macro coverage environment, but more kind of a surgical coverage environment, like in factories or hospitals, or where you don't have to deploy 5G everywhere, but some of the capabilities that are available in 5G could be deployed in a very targeted area.
Yeah, good point. So so you can be very surgical, as you mentioned, from a 5G deployment. We see everything being more macro and trying to cover as much territory as possible, but to a certain extent, you can actually get into where you need capacity, right? Or you need a hotspot or things like that. So you'd be looking at stadiums, for example, things along those lines, where you need that capacity at that point in time. You can also be looking at other types of healthcare, things like that, where, for example, like hospitals, you can actually bring it more into a wireless type of applications, things like that, where everything is connected. They talk about, robotics as far as helping with maintenance and cleaning and things like that. So those are other opportunities that you can be looking at for those type of applications. Then when you get into manufacturing, another opportunity is from a robotics side of it, logistics, things along those lines where you get everything connected. So those are just a couple examples where you can actually focus in on a particular location, campus, or customer. So.
Yeah. Eric and Craig, one of the worries at the policymaking level is what does 5G do to the digital divide? Do we wait till 5G matures and then roll out, or we go at the same time? Craig, I know you are quite passionate about the topic. How do you view 5G in relation to digital divide, and what as a country the policymakers should be thinking about?
I'm having a lot of trouble with the echo off that wall. Could you rephrase that? Let me hear that question again.
Yeah, so my question is around digital divide and 5G. How should policymakers think about that?
So we're in the middle of some partnerships in terms of rural connectivity and trying to take a different look at it. It's a public, open group that we're going to share some of those learnings. Actually, Nokia is one of the partners with us. We're actually taking a band 41 massive MIMO deployment into a quite rural deployment, where normally, with today's business models and everything the way it works economically, you really wouldn't justify taking it where we're taking it. But we're going to share those learnings with the industry publicly, and there'll be some learnings out of that for fixed wireless connectivity. And in addition to that, if you actually break it down in the era of 5G as low band below a gigahertz, mid-band, which for us would be band 41, which is the same gas that T-Mobile and Sprint are cooking with. We have that, and then CBRS would be in that middle band spectrum. And to Charlie's point about folks like Tirana that are doing proprietary versus 5G, we as a regional carrier, and we've made this clear even on the 5G on the millimeter wave, once you get above, I don't know, whether it's 28 gig for us, which we own that spectrum, or 60 gigahertz unlicensed, they all have roles to play in rural connectivity. It seems counterintuitive to talk about millimeter wave and rural, but when you actually understand what makes a state like Mississippi the 5th most rural, it's actually pockets of cities that are in communities that are 100, 200, 400 folks, something like that. And when you look at them, you zoom in and look at them on the satellite view, it turns out they look like a sparse suburban in any other. They're small, they're tiny. I mean, you'd miss them on the highway if you drove by. But actually, millimeter wave has a role to play to bring gigabit kind of connectivity to rural communities. We're going to be speaking about that as well. The real problems when you get to the edge of the donut, right? When that sparse starts to drop off, and you end up the absolute lone farm in the middle of nowhere is a completely different problem to solve than those people that are right at the edge of the donut, to where those mid-band and those millimeter wave technologies come to play in 5G era. And we've been public, we've said whether it's modified 802.11ax or whether it's 5G NR, you know, all of the companies up here are working on both of those simultaneously. You know, in the press, in the 5G mobility, it's popular to talk about the NR side of that, but they actually converge to solve a lot of rural connectivity problems in the future at different price points in different cases and different use cases. But so we're exploring those all. We're doing a number of trials in that area for it. But really what it comes down to on that digital divide problem, this is not a technology problem.
Yeah.
There are a lot of smart people and a lot of smart technologists that actually are making the technology. It's an adoptability and it's a usability problem. It's an economic problem. We've got a lot of folks in our communities that even if I knocked on if I just waved a magic wand and connected every rooftop in my geography that looked like a home or a business, and I had a gigabit connection to it, just magic wand, done. By whatever, quantum entangled pairs of something that doesn't even exist today. I don't care about the XXL, they've got a gig. And I show up and it's to Charlie's point, it's the triple play, it's $100, it's not $250. I go to a lot of our rural communities and their connectivity to the internet today is their phone. They need that to get text messages and SMS, to take a weekend shift for their job. And you know, some of them are on prepaid and they'll come on and off the network. As they have money, they come on and off. They'll be on for a couple weeks, they'll go off. And it's $20, $30. And then I show up with this wonderful 1 gig connection for $100, and that's money they don't have.
Sure.
And if it's just fixed to their house, it doesn't solve their problem. It solves mine. I want to sell internet, but it doesn't solve theirs. Yeah. And it's really about how do we end up with a model that without subsidies, without any, you know, maybe that can kickstart it, but in the long run, how do we approach their rural use cases on affordability and uptake and usage? Because you can't change, you know, you can't close that digital divide and move into a modern economy with the folks in those communities if they can't afford to use the service. Yeah. And that's part of what we really as an industry need to address.
Eric, any thoughts on that? And then I want to talk about software.
I do see 5G as a really good bridge in helping solve some of our issues with the digital divide. It gets you sometimes at last mile, sometimes maybe it's a middle mile play. Yet for what I see in my world, it's still about getting access. It's still about getting that site, that facility close enough to the end user to use it. And you know, today if I can't get a right of way, I can't get a right of way. Sometimes it takes me 2 years to get a right of way to plow cable into an interstate right of way. Doesn't make sense to me, but it sure does to someone else. It's the challenges of how do we get it out there, and I think 5G has just one piece of it. The technology is there, but without the access and without everything else really coming together, it's just going to be hit and miss. And there needs to be a lot more consistency, and there needs to be a lot more awareness of the issues, especially in the rural parts. You claim to be number 5 in the U.S. in rural. I think I'm number 1 in the continental. Thank you, Alaska, for being number 1 totally for us. But you know, it's a challenge, and you know, there's very difficult cost revenue model that works when it's that sparse. There's that lack of other people to pay for it out there. And so we have to use not only the technology that's available, but you kind of also have to, I hate to use that term, think outside of the box to do it. But a lot of the traditional methods aren't working, and you really have to use everything at your disposal to get it to that end user.
So that brings me to kind of the software, the role of software in 5G. I mean, clearly, you know, if you just do plain economics model of 5G, CapEx spend, the line goes this way. But you know, we all know revenue is flat or declining. So what's the role that software, you think, and things like open source, open standards play in how you digitize the network, how you virtualize the network, how you think about enabling a lot of the features like network slicing, how you enable new application services, how fast you can enable them. So could anybody, you know, I mean, it's an open topic around the role software is going to play in the next 10 years in how you think about modernizing your network.
So sure. I mean, I think 5G is far more software-defined than any other generation. So if we think about the creation of a slice, an end-to-end slice from a subscriber to the core for specific use cases, the amount of control of resources and processing across the network that needs to be done, the orchestration and control, clearly that really has to be done in a very automated way. And so automation platforms and machine learning use of those automation platforms, I think, is the way to go there. So we create closed-loop solutions for automation of the network. So this is far, far beyond SON capabilities. This is a whole new approach to the network. And if we look at automation approaches in the industry, so ONAP, for example, Open Network Automation Platform, is one such approach, which is an open source approach to building applications on top of that controls the network. So it brings in open source, brings in standardized interfaces from an OSS capability. So that's one initiative. I think the other initiative a lot of people working on, and Ericsson's a member of ORAN, and where we open a lot of the interfaces in the network, and that creates, I think creates its own challenges. I mean, there are 4 different splits of architecture, 5 different interfaces to define. So it creates, in some respects, creates a lot more complexity, but also gives more programmability in the network. So I think making sure that we align some of these new open initiatives also with the 3GPP interface standards. After all, 3GPP has successfully onboarded in a kind of open fashion, sort of 6 or 7 billion subscribers around the world. So I think combining the best of breed between 3GPP and some of these open network standards approaches is the way to go for 5G, and that's what we'll see roll out across the world.
So Craig, you touched upon that. I'll come back to Bob. I think it might be a good time to talk about network slicing and what it means to the operating model for a lot of the carriers in the room. How does that change? How should people think about network slicing as a key business proposition as to how they engage with the rest of the ecosystem?
Well, again, it's amazing how many things Charlie actually captured well in his analogies when we got open in the morning. The business models today we're still kind of stuck in the 4G modem hotspot day. So you want to monitor that gas pump or that whatever. Here's an $80 a month hotspot, unlimited data. And you're like, that is absolutely not the problem they're after. Like, I want to pop up a few bits per month or something. And we, well then you can have an all-you-can-eat narrowband IoT for $30 a year or $8 a month or some, we're still stuck. There's nothing automated about it. There's no dynamic model. There's no slicing. There's nothing that comes in with I want something that monitors an alarm system, and it's a gate on a security on a ranch or something, and 99% of the time it's doing nothing. It puts up a few bits per day, and that's a different pricing model. But then I need, in time of emergency, when something happens, I need a megabit per second to pull a camera feed out of it. How do you price that? Those are the, in terms of slicing and what do you want, you actually, you think of how complicated plans are for folks on the retail side for us today, and you look at folks that come in and completely simplify it. You've got one flavor or two. You actually need almost, in terms of the automated systems, just bespoke automated plans that come together that solve very specific problems. And the only way you can monetize that efficiently and how you'd charge and bill for it, right? It's that whole, all of us in telecom that have ever known this, all good ideas go to die on the rocky shores of the billing system. That's where they're all hanging out. So unless that system is flexible and makes use of the 5G technologies and the slicing and all those capabilities, we can't even imagine these bespoke pricing models that are individual to the specific problems. So because today I'm just going to throw an $80 a year or a month, modem at you, and that's that's not the problem.
Yeah. So that brings an interesting question around how you deal with legacy versus new business models, or say billing system. So how do you straddle that world? Do you launch new services on a new OSS BSS, or you start to replace and modernize your existing OSS BSS?
This gets to the point where we're all hovering around we're hanging onto our old anchors from below, which is these layer 2 and layer 3 ideas about billing and pricing. And when you get to these brokers and these Airbnbs that are actually much higher up the service layer stack, they're coming in with, and by the way, that's where the margins are. It's not down in the layer 1 anymore. They're coming in and solving very complicated problems with end-to-end solutions that are not possible today without a lot of the technologies on the core side and the network capabilities and the virtualization that come with 5G. So that you can't, today those folks can't solve those problems in a holistic approach that have this almost service layer that is you know, I have no way to bill and charge. I have no way to interface and enable that type of behavior when people roam or want to be part of my network to join a network of networks. That all is a lot of innovation and disruptive innovation that has to happen in our industry in the next 5 years.
Bob, you want to add something?
Yeah, I agree, and I want to go back to something. You know, I think we talk a lot about how 5G is inherently more software-based and virtualized and all this, but I don't think that's a foregone conclusion. I think there's a lot of inertia in the industry right now around the way networks have been built for so many years, and so for decades, we've essentially built mobile networks in the same way, and for decades, really, the features that you could offer on a mobile network were defined by two things. One was the UE, or the feature phone, right? And then the second one was the radio. And now with the smartphone era, obviously, you know, the dependency on the feature phone has diminished or really kind of gone away there. But the networks are still so centered around the radio access network defining the rest of the network, and that's a real danger as we go forward. Because now we have an opportunity to find the networks by the services we want to deliver and by the operational model instead of by the radio network. And so, and I think that what we're hearing here is a lot around that. And so when we look at, you know, how are you going to get to that next generation service delivery platform, really got to think from the inside out. And when we do that, and we truly virtualize that and build that cloud-based infrastructure, and you open up the RAN and truly open up the RAN, then you get more flexible solutions to problems like Eric had around how do I get to this cell site? How do I, you know, it's a complex sort of, you know, situation between getting the rights, getting the right-of-ways, all that. If we can get simpler solutions to that, smaller footprint out there, you know, with some of the splits, maybe with a mid-haul split, then you reduce the amount of bandwidth that has to go to that site, but you still get the benefits of centralization. And so I think that's really key, and I don't want us to just kind of blow by that, because I think that's really important. The other thing, just on the services side, that I think is interesting as we look at 5G, and again, about the rights and sort of municipality cooperation, is that I think that 5G, you know, what we're seeing around the world is 5G is one of these things that, you know, cities want to use to be competitive and to draw industry in and to do that. And I think there might be, you know, some collaborative work with the municipalities, with the county, you know, local governments, whatever, to say, look, you want to attract more industry here, more factories, things like that. Partner with us, help us to get hanging rights, help us to get this network deployed, and we can help you draw industry there. So I think there's some interesting things that even address the rural communities.
So on that aspect, you know, the smart city initiatives worldwide, obviously some are going faster than others. The challenge there is who puts the initial set of dollars on the table, right? I mean, clearly, over a long period of time, you know, if you have a 20, 30-year partnership, you can see the operating model, but the challenge has been the first 2, 3 years. Who is it the operator? Is it the system integrator? Is it you know, a vendor? Or it makes, you know, some public money needs to be had. Like what is from the work that Cisco has done, or Nokia, or Ericsson? You know, what's the right way for small towns and cities to think about an operating model where they can bring these players together for their region?
You know, it varies because there's so many different scenarios around the world, you know, large cities, smaller cities. But I think, you know, we've seen collaborative agreements where cities, as an example, have wanted to invest, and so they've done some sort of a collaborative agreement. You know, certainly Cisco, we've got a lot of different programs that we're trying to do, operator-led. I think it depends on, and what we found is you really kind of have to roll up your sleeves on, you know, what's the problem you want to solve in this particular area? Because I think a while ago we thought that there was this broad brush, you know, whether you want to call it smart cities or, you know, all this. And what we're finding is that the business model ends up being pretty customized to the particular area.
Brian, your thoughts on kind of onboarding the operators onto the you know, digital services journey? You know, how should they think about digital services beyond just enhanced broadband for 5G?
Yeah, I think it's more of a, I think we've talked about before, it's more of a long-term investment, actually looking at it from, okay, what can I do now? But if I'm looking down the road, what can I do down the road? And I think you have to invest in that future going forward. We talked about virtualization, we talked about all kinds of orchestration, things like that. I think you're just going to have to start and plan and lay it out and then figuring out how you're going to get to the next step, if that's low latency, IoT, whatever that may be, past mobile broadband. So again, I think it's just planning the future and where you want to head, and then setting out those steps to go do that. I think is really what it's going to boil down to.
Yeah. So we have 5-6 minutes left. Maybe we could talk about, say you run into, after this conference, run into your CEO or a board member, and they say, hey, Eric or Craig or everybody else, how should our company, are we doing the right things? Do we need to do something different? What's your key message to the key decision makers in your company? And we'll probably start with Eric.
Well, I think the biggest key is you got to start somewhere, and you really need to play to your strengths in many ways. Charlie mentioned that very well. I like that. It's not always just about your weaknesses and fixing them. Their strengths are what have kept us in business over these years, and we really need to keep there and to find that customer, find those users that want and are willing to invest into it, and help you expand it out in the rest of your network. You got to start one place, and whether it's with that first customer or whether it's with that first tower, you got to start that point and just keep expanding and make sure you're doing it in the right way where you can create that model that doesn't only help you today but also tomorrow. We always joke, some of my cousins, we always joke about we like to make decisions that our children have to deal with. And this is one of them here today. We have to get it right on the infrastructure side. We have to get it right on the technology side, so it really does become their problem. It really is making those decisions that'll carry us through and make us successful.
Yeah. Greg?
Well, we didn't deploy 4G overnight. We're not going to do that with 5G. And there's a lot more optionality with 5G than there was before. And if you actually look at the models we as a community work under, you used to make the assumption, well, you've launched your 4G network, right? It's my band, it's your band, we're okay. The UE supports it, we're good. It turns out there's a lot more complicated capabilities and behind it, that if we get back to the service delivery platform conversation, it gets back to the heart of product development 101. What problem does the customer have, and what value do I bring to them if I solve it? And those are very often complex problems that involve everything from low power, wide area networks, all these new technologies that actually let us solve new problems that we haven't been able to solve before. Sure. But there's so much optionality, as a carrier, and especially as a regional one, you have to look at, well, what are your competitors? Any strategy starts with an understanding of what your competitors can do with and to you if they make moves. And how do I complement, and how do I look at this entire buffet of 5G features, and what do I invest in? It's not as simple as just hanging the spectrum anymore. And you've got to have an approach to how you're going to go after this piecewise. Are you going to go after millimeter wave sporting venues at first with 28 gig and fixed, all of that, and let alone the software features. Just launching an NR waveform at a particular frequency is a baby step. And you got to have a piecewise strategy on how you pay for that over time.
Brian, obviously Nokia is doing significant amount of work in rolling out products. Are there certain things you will tell Rajiv to focus on in terms of products or services based on what you have heard today?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to everything that we've done already today. And it's the full end-to-end type of solution is really what it boils down to. I know we heard a lot of things from a RAN perspective. We heard orchestration, things along those lines. Virtualizing the network, and again, I think it's a total end-to-end type of package that you have to look at. We talked about RAM, we talked about core, but also transport. You can't forget that, because in certain cases, if you're bringing back a lot of data, you either got to offload it at the edge, or you got to bring it all the way back and get to be able to handle that. So I think you got to look at it from a full end-to-end type of solution, and so I think that's the value you have to bring to from a 5G perspective. So,
Bob?
Yeah, sure. So just kind of reflecting back on the conversation and all the conversations with customers here and on. 5G, huge opportunities, right? But I think it can also be a little bit scary. As we talk to the regional operators here and different operators, where do I start? What do I do? And Craig actually used one of my favorite words, optionality, because I think that as you build out for that optionality, then and as you define things in your network and as you're making investments now, you just kind of have to get started. But you want to get started on those paths that are going to open up more options, not that are going to limit your capabilities in the future. And I think that's really, really key, and I think one of the most important things we can do right now.
I think, first message, plan now. Don't think that this is something that's going to happen 5 years in advance. Think about it now. Don't spend another dollar on any equipment or product or services that can't move to 5G. Pick the architectures that you're going to go towards and move your whole network towards those future architectures. And then I think a very important piece is spectrum strategy. So don't think just because you have a certain spectrum situation today that's it. There are lots of options. So clearly there's lots of millimeter wave spectrum coming up for auction, 2 gigahertz of new spectrum in millimeter wave over the next couple of years from the FCC. Think about it, just go through that. There's also shared spectrum options, so CBRS, the CBRS PAL auctions, and in the future, the C-band auctions. So lots of new spectrums that get opinionated, work with the CCA in terms of lobbying the spectrum strategy for this community group and understand what that can be. So really think about and make an active decision on your strategy on spectrum. I think that they would be the 3 messages.
And we're right on time. Great. Well, please join me in thanking a wonderful panel. I think we got a lot out of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chetan.
Yeah,
appreciate it, Paul. Appreciate it. Thank you. Hey, Craig. Thank you.